Hi loves, welcome back to the channel Style by C. On today's tutorial, we'll talk on how to recreate this beautiful VK James inspired wear. Alright, to subscribe to the channel, don't forget to turn your notification bell, share, like, and comment. So guys, the first thing I did was to fold my fabric into two, which is this. Alright, now the next thing I'm going to be doing is from your half length. So I'm working with half length of 18 inches. So from my half length, I inserted the full length of my trouser. Okay, the trouser part of my jumpsuit. Now, having done that, this is my startup line, where I'm going to be inserting my waist measurements. So from here now, I'm going to come down to 9 inches, where my hip is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and make a line, a horizontal line. So this is my hip. Then to get my crotch depth, what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide my hip measurements by 4, and I'm going to be adding 1 inch to it. That is to get your normal crotch depth. But because this is a jumpsuit, I'm going to be adding 1 inch to it, making it 12 inches. So this is my crotch depth. Sorry, the chalk is faint. I don't know. This is a blue chalk actually, but more is giving me stress. Alright guys, so I'm going to be starting. The first thing I did was to fold my fabric into two. Alright, now the next thing I did was to place my tape at my half length, which is 18 inches. Okay, then from there I dragged it down to the full length of my trouser of my jumpsuit. So these 18 inches now from here is going to be starting up as my start line, and that's where my waist measurement is going to be. I'm sorry, the chalk is very faint. So this is my startup line. Then from that point, I'm going to be marking 9 inches for my hip. You can decide to mark 8 inches, but because this is a jumpsuit, I'm working with 9. Alright. Then the next thing I did was to divide my hip measurement by 4, add 1 inch to it to get my crotch line or crotch depth. So my hip is 40. When I divide it by 4, I'll have 10 plus 1 inch, which is giving me 11 inches crotch depth. But because this is a jumpsuit, I added 1 inch to it, making it 12 inches. So the crotch depth you're working with this is 12, which is here. So now the next thing we are going to go ahead to do now is to insert our round body measurements. First of all, I'm going to be working with the hip. I'll divide the hip by 4, 10. I'm going to be adding 1 inch seam allowance, making it 11. So I'm going to mark it on my hip. I'm also going to go ahead and mark it on my crotch line, which is here. And mark it on my waistline, which is here. Having done that, I went ahead to connect all of them using a straight line. Alright, so now the next thing I'm going to do is on my crotch depth, I'm going to be inserting my lap measurements. So my lap or your lap, whatever you have, divided by 2. So mine is 27. When I divide it by 2, I'll have 13 and a half. I'll be adding extra 1 inch to it, making it 14 and a half inches. So I'm going to go ahead and mark it here. So this is it here. Now from my hip line, I'm going to be making a curve inwards. So from here now, I'm going to curve it into my lap line. Alright, now on my waist line, I'm going to divide my waist measurements by 4 plus 1 inch seam allowance. So my waist I'm working with is 30. When I divide it by 4, I have 7.5 plus 1 inch, making it 8.5, which is here. So from here now I'm going to connect it to my hip. So this is what I have. Now we're going to be working with the down parts from this point now, because this is a palazzo pant, but not a large palazzo pant. It is well shaped. Alright, so we're going to be working on this area now. Let me adjust the camera. So now the next thing I'm going to be working on is this down part of my trouser. Alright, so I'm going to be marking the crotch measurements, and that's my lap measurements I have on my crotch line. I'm going to be marking it here. So I have 14.5 there, so I'm also having 14.5 here. All right, so what I'm going to do now, from this 14 inches from this side, I'm going to come in by 2 inches, which is here. This is my 2 inches here. Then from this point I'm also going to come in by 2 inches, which is here. All right, so I've removed 2 inches from both sides. Now from the lap line here, I'm going to be connecting it to this point, and from this area too, I'm also going to connect it to this point. Sorry, I'm going to adjust the camera later. Let me just finish this up so you see what we have. So this is what it's looking like. All right, so you can decide to still shape it more. You can decide to leave it this way. You can decide to still trim it in a bit, which is totally fine. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. Guys, now we're going to be working on our back piece. So this is our front piece. I've gone ahead to place it on my back piece. All right, so what I did here now, because you can see some markings, I went ahead to add extra 2 inches from my front to my back. All right, so I added 2 inches for it. All right, so now coming to my front piece, I'm going to be coming down by 1 inch. This is my 1 inch here. I'm going to be coming down by 1 inch, and I'm going to be connecting it to my waist. All right, and for my back piece, I'm going to be going up by 1.5 inches, which is here. I'm going to be connecting it to my waist. So for the front, I came down by 1 inch. Then for the back, I went up by 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this piece out. So guys, the next thing I'm going to do now is to go ahead to join my pieces together. So I'm gonna have to place this right side facing each other. So let's assume I'm working on this one first. I'm going to go ahead and run a stitch on the side till I get to the bottom. Then I'm also going to start from this crotch depth that is here and go ahead and also stitch it down. All right, I'm going to do it for the 2 sides of my trouser. So guys, the first thing we're going to be marking is our upper body. So now I'm going to mark my half length, which is at 18 inches. This is my half length. This is my start point, which is going to be serving as my shoulder line. So I will start my shoulder measurement, which is 8. I'm going to be coming down by 1 inch for my shoulder sleeve, 3 inches for my neck width, then connect these two together. Then from this point now, I'm going to come down by 7.5. That is my armhole measurement. To get yours, divide it by 6, your bust measurement by 6, add 1.5 inches to it. So this is my chest line. I'm also going to mark what I have here, my shoulder measurements at this point here on this chest line. Then I'm going to connect these 2 dots together. Having done this, I'll divide it by 2 to get the midpoint. This is my midpoint. At that point, I'm going to be coming in by 0.5 inch. From my 1 inch down, I'm connecting it to my 0.5 inch here. From this point, I'm going to be covering it in. But before then, I'll mark my bust measurements here. Whatever you have as a bust measurement, you hit it. Then curve your armhole, or get your armhole curve. So this is what I have. The next thing I'm going to be marking is my waistline, which is 7.5 inches. So this is my waistline. 10 inches, which is my bust point. 13 inches, my under bust. This is what I have. All right, so I'll mark my nipple to nipple points, which is 4 inches. I'll mark it on my waist, on my nipple points, on my bust points. Then I'm connecting all of them together, all the points together. This is what I have. I'm going to be coming down by 1 inches from here. This is where my dart is going to be starting from. The next thing I'm going to do is either mark 1 inch on both sides of your dart leg for your dart intake, or you mark 0.75 inches. So I'm going ahead with 0.75 inches. That's what I use for my dart intake. Having done this, this is what I have. Now I have 7.5 here. I've removed 1.5 here. I'm going to be adding it back to this place, plus 2 inches sewing allowance, or 1.5 inches sewing allowance. Then at this point now, I'm going to be adding my seam allowance, 1.5 inches. Then I'm going to go ahead and connect them together. So this is what I have. The next thing I'm going to be marking now. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to be working with 3.5 inches for my neck depth. So I have 3.5 inches here. I'm going to go ahead and curve it. So this is what I have, and I'm going to cut it out. Having done this, this is what I have. I'm going to be opening up my pattern paper. All right, now I want to, because we're going to be having a 2 in front, like at the upper part of our dress. So I'm going to divide my armhole into two, sorry, my shoulder slope into two. So I have 5 here. The midpoint is 2.5 inches. All right, now the next thing I'm going to do is that from this armhole of mine, I'm going to be coming down to 6.5 inches, which is here. All right, now from this point, now half of my shoulder measurements, I'm going to be connecting to this my 6.5 inches here. So from here now, I'm going to be making a curve to that point. All right, so that's what I'm going to do there. So first of all, I'm going to be making a stretch rule. Now, from this point, I'm going to be going off by 2 inches. So from here now, I'm just trying to create a curve. Sorry, I'm using a freehand first. Okay. So these 2 inches I marked here is not valid. Okay, so you just ignore it, please. So from this point now, so this is what my upper part is going to be looking like. This is going to be where my two or net is going to be, and this is going to be my fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. So this is what we are going to be having. So for my back piece, what I went ahead to do was to close up my pattern paper, folded it back to cut out my back piece. All right, so remember we used 3.5 inches for the neck depth of our front, but for our back piece we're going to be working with 2 inches deep. Before I place this, I left about how many inches? Let's see, almost 2 inches. Okay, but I just want 1.5 inches, so I'm going to reduce it for our zip allowance. Then the neck depth is 2 inches deep. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. For the upper part of our dress, this is my two. I've gone ahead to cut it. I cut a double, turned it out with one. All right, now I'm going to be turning it out with my lining. Okay, so that's what I'm going to go ahead now and do. For my back piece, I've also gone ahead to turn it out with my lining. So guys, at this point now, I've gone ahead to turn out my front upper pieces with a lining. This is my front, this is my back piece. So the next thing I'm going ahead to do now is to stitch on my dart intake. That's what I'm going to go ahead and do. This is my back and this is my front. I'm going to do it, then join my two shoulders together. At this point now, I'm gonna head to join my two shoulders together. This is what I'm having. Okay, and so we're gonna I have also I'm also gonna
So
head
guys,
to go
at this
down my
point now,
sleeve.
I'm done joining
One
my
part of it is going
pieces
to be a
together,
two
the front
sleeve, and the
part
other
and
side
the
is going to be
back part of
normal
our
sleeve.
upper
Like I'm going to
pieces
be using the
together.
fabric for the sleeve.
The next thing I'm
So
going to be
now,
introducing
what
is
I'm
the
going to do is
blouse.
I'm going to shape it
This is
and
what I
attach my
have. That's the next
sleeves.
thing I'm going
All
to
right?
be introducing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be doing it center to center. Remember that it's going to be overlapping each other by 5 inches. Okay, so that's what I'm going to go ahead and do there now. Then our flans or our peplon is not going to get into our zipper allowance. It's going to be stopping 1 inch or 2 inches. Where your zip allowance stops, that's where you're going to stop. okay, where you are going to be, it's not going to enter into your zip allowance. Please kindly note that. Okay, so when I'm done now, the next thing I went ahead to do was to join the trouser part of my jumpsuit to this upper piece. Then I went ahead to do the beadwork, tacked the flowers. That was what I went ahead to do. Thank you so much, loves, for watching. Just subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up. See you in our next tutorial. And I'll also be dropping a link on how I cut the flowers that was attached to our jumpsuits. I really, really appreciate you guys. You are so, so, so wonderful.